Well, welcome to Black Men Speak, a podcast that highlights ordinary Black men doing extraordinary things. I am your host, Keith Dent. Just the technical difficulties there. I was hearing some feedback, but it's just great to be here once again. It's been a little bit of, I guess, there's always a couple of delays here and there because I like to bring extraordinary guests into the program. To me, it's really quality, over quantity. So tonight we're gonna tackle a very important subject in our communities, and that's financial literacy. So according to Investopedia, when someone is financially literate, they have the essential foundation with money. This can help start a lifelong journey in learning in the financial aspects of life. So you're generally less vulnerable to financial fraud. You can also support your various life goals, like saving for college and your education, retirement, being able to use debt responsibly, and all important, maybe running your own business. But on the flip side, not having the financial education makes it more likely to accumulate unsustainable debt burdens, either through your poor spending choices or lack of long-term vision, which ultimately could lead to poor credit, even bankruptcy, or losing your house through foreclosure. So, as a nation, how are we doing? And then as, specifically as African Americans, how are we doing? Well, in 2019, there's an organization called the TIAA Institute, and they put out a thing which I had never heard of, which was the PFIN Index, which provides some stats on financial illiteracy. So on average, the African American adults answered 38% of the PFIN Index questions. So I think there's about 28 of them, and there's like about 8 categories of financial topics, and only 28% answered one half of the index questions correctly, with 5% answering over 75% of the questions correctly. Financial literacy is significantly higher among men, and then there's a 7 percentage point difference between African American men and women, as far as and that's answering the questions correctly. Your knowledge tends to increase with age, and then 1/3 of the index questions are answered correctly on average under the age of 45, compared to 43% among those age 45 and older. And then the personal finance knowledge tends to be greater among those with higher household income. And of course, that kind of plays into it. Higher household income means maybe they have a home or they have their own business, and they need to know additional financial information in order for things to run smoothly. Lastly, African American households below 25,000 and those with household incomes of 100,000 or more. That's the questions. That's the range that they value this question on. So to provide more context to this issue and discuss how we just address the disparity problem, my guest today is Cy Richardson. Cy is a senior vice president for economic programs at the National Urban League and a member of their league's executive leadership team. Cy is a recognized and respected expert on housing and community development, job creation, and racial wealth equity, and is a sought-after thought leader on issues related to building a more inclusive economy. Central to his work is the promotion of asset building and intergenerational wealth creation opportunities for people of color in urban America. So, Cy, welcome to our podcast. How are you doing?
Great, Keith. Thanks so much. Good to be here.
Such fascinating stuff. First of all, in preparation for our discussion today, I hadn't even heard of the PFIN index. So if you could tell me what is the PFIN index, and and just some of the basic questions or concepts that they look to talk about in this index.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a fairly inartful terminology, but essentially it's the setting up the rubric of measurement for how we define and measure financial literacy, which has a little bit to do with knowledge, but it's more having to do with functional knowledge and the 28 questions that were developed by the TIAA Institute. That's the research arm of TIAA-CREF, the insurer, and the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center, which is housed at George Washington University under the founding and leadership of Dr. Anna Maria Lasardi, and I've been on a few panels with her. So that study is a joint effort to assess the financial literacy or the functional knowledge among the U.S. adult population, and it's an annual survey.
Okay, and how do people join the survey? Because of course, I had never even heard of it, and I was just basically on some of the comments or just the stats from the survey. I was really wondering, well, who are these people that are selected?
Well, so I mean, there's a rigor. This is considered, academic research, applied academic research. The participants for the PFED index study are selected through an online survey that's conducted among a representative sample of U.S. adults ages 18 to 65, and the survey, again, is designed to ensure diversity in demographics, including age, gender, race, and sociodemographic status, to accurately reflect the financial literacy of the broader population. As you said, there are 28 multiple choice questions covering 8 functional areas of personal finance, and the methodology that the center employs allows their researchers to gather kind of comprehensive data on financial literacy across the different segments of the population. So that's the kind of general methodology. I don't know what the data sets that they use to outbound trying to contact folks for the survey, but that's the general methodology.
Okay. Great. And I know you are an expert. You've been doing a lot of work around this area. So one of the questions that I find very interesting to and I wanted to ask you is, like, especially in your programs and things of that nature, where do people, when you ask them questions about financial literacy, what do most people answer when you ask them this?
So I'll have to say, just contextualize this, that I design, run, and talk about the programs designed by the National Urban League, an historic civil rights organization, 116 years old, based in New York. We have 93 affiliates across the country in 36 states and the District of Columbia. So that's just the structure by which I answer the question. 78% of our clients are African American, native born Black. Although we are a place-based movement serving people where they are, so in Seattle and Phoenix and San Diego and parts of Atlanta, Miami, we serve a more multicultural client base, but still, Black folks we are unabashedly and unashamedly for and about. So understand, I'm answering your question through that lens. So the answers are nuanced in the sense that finance and personal household finance and intergenerational household finance, those are about as close to the third rail in the Black community in terms of open conversation and disclosure. And so while most folks, and there's a tension here in the data, so while most folks have a discomfort in terms of talking about personal finance, both within the household and between households, that is the chief place where folks identify where they're getting most of their knowledge from a family member. That's the answer. But I know you have a younger generation, that's listening here, and I encourage them to kind of lean into this conversation. The most recent data, Keith, suggests that the number one place where people are, or African Americans, are getting their information and knowledge and guidance and tips about personal finance is the same place where they're getting their mainstream news, which is through social media and TikTok in particular.
Wow, TikTok.
That's
TikTok.
the answer.
Which is a place that is not necessarily where you can share your own personal stories. You just kind of hear in a maybe a 15-second soundbite what you should be doing.
Sure, and it's serialized, and it's, again, meant for maximum. But again, there's a multiplier effect, and again, social capital, which, as you know, rages positively in our community, can be harnessed through technology. That one 15-second soundbite goes around the world 10 times and back. But then again, just like the telephone game, the original message may not be what comes back in the back end.
Right,
so a lot of it can become distorted, as you know.
So one of the things that they talked about, we in the community don't get all the questions right, or at least we get about half of the questions right. In your research, or just around the topic, what are really the main questions that we don't get right?
So they group them. So categorically, there are 5 out of the cluster 28 questions. There are 8 substantive areas. 5 of them are where African Americans demonstrate a tendency to struggle with their financial literacy. And I'm putting air quotes around that in those areas, and I'll tell you what they are. But again, the PFIN index highlights 8 areas where for the general population, but there are 5 areas where, as I mentioned, African Americans tend to struggle. And while the specific questions can vary, the 5 functional areas where Black people of all socioeconomic standing. This is not just low and moderate income communities or upper class communities. This is LMI, middle income, and the more affluent, which is an important variable. So the most frequently incorrect are in 5 areas. The first is around insurance and insuring, understanding insurance products and their benefits. The second is around what they call comprehending risk, which is assessing financial risk and understanding the implications of different financial decisions. So that could mean, deciding which, retirement products or which insurance products. So kind of at point of sale, as it were, having the functional knowledge to make the best decision that's in your economic interest in the moment. And that sometimes we demonstrate uneven outcomes. The third area is investing. Knowledge about investment options and strategy. I can talk a little bit about what's driving that a bit later, if you like, from a workforce development standpoint. The fourth area is identifying go-to information sources. The question you just asked me, Keith, which is, again, knowing where to find reliable financial information. And the fifth area is saving, essentially putting to practice effective strategies for saving money. Those are the areas that represent the key aspects of personal finance, where targeted education, we believe, and resources could significantly improve financial literacy and well-being in these areas. But those are the areas that we've adjudged to be deficient.
Here, an interesting one is about risk or insurance. Wouldn't that? Most that we would rely, when we go to seek insurance, that would really rely on the insurance agent to help us with that support. So and then also one of the primary reasons is that we usually get insurance either for a car or for a home, and since
here's the main. You're right. I interpret this one.
Oh yes, please.
The data is life insurance here.
Oh, life insurance. Oh, I see.
Yeah. The benefits, like car insurance, is required by law. So even though there's discrimination there, And health insurance is required by many employers, and Obamacare now provides it at no or low cost, but it is required. It's things where the Asian and the white community and to the Latinx community to some degree creates distance in the racial wealth gap between those communities and the Black community have to do with places like insurance and understanding insurance products.
So primarily our lack of having life insurance
and understanding why to have it, the ability to get it in a way that's affordable. Again, health, there's kind of social determinants of health, things like that. But again, life insurance also can be cashed out. It can help finance other things. So it's a platform that white America leverages more acutely than we do.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. And yeah, and I'll try to hold that because that you may have tips on, especially young people that may be starting to get their job with us.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, Keith.
Thank you. Can do.
Good one.
Yeah. So, great. So another question that I had is one of the things that came up was that African Americans felt on a whole that we had too much debt, 45% versus, and where that may be the case, what do you feel in your mind, what are some of the reasons why we feel we carry too much debt?
Well, too much, TOO much is a subjective thing. That means different things.
Right, because technically in the white communities, they don't worry about that too much. They can, because they'll leverage debt for other things.
Exactly. That's what you answered it. You're right. It's about, but it gets to your, the Urban League has launched a program around financial therapy, which gets to the kind of emotional connection that we as individual actors have towards money and money conversations and doing the things we know we need to do. And the anxiety around those things is not held equally between ethnic communities, and the white community does not have the legacy of that anxiety. But the reality is, you're right, there's different kinds of debt, as you mentioned. But I'm talking about small dollar debt, daily debt, recurring revolving debt. That does predominate in communities of color, Black and brown communities. That's kind of not so much living paycheck to paycheck, that most of us are doing that. But it has to do more so with what kind of debt you're leveraging, what kind of credit at what terms, and what you're trying to do with it, to your point around leveraging it. So those are some of the distinctions.
And what would be just an example of revolving debt that is something that we in our communities carry?
Well, I mean, something would be things like, kind of check cashing, basic, economic structures that don't work in our economic interest, check cashing, payday loans, kind of lease to purchase furniture arrangements, things like that. Store credit cards that have interest rates above 30%. That may be usurious. So it's things, right. In order to, and I'm not saying this in a pejorative way, but in order to keep up with the Joneses, the trappings of a lifestyle, whether it's middle class or upper middle class or whatever, or affluent, the short-term credit needed to support that is usually not on good credit terms that are in our economic best interest. Yet we are most susceptible to the messaging that drives.
And that's the one thing I found fascinating, whereby if we don't have a bank in our area, and we have a check cashing place, what are they gonna use? They're gonna go to the check cashing place, or if there is a Raymore and Flanagan furniture store in their area, there's I can't think of one. I don't want to disparage anyone, but but those kind of furniture places in their area, they need something to sleep on, and so therefore they're almost bound to those things,
right?
And so it makes it much more difficult, but difficult now to deal with or understanding how those trappings could affect them. It's quite fascinating.
It is. It's a great point. And can I just tie maybe just an observation to an earlier question you asked, which is around where do people get their information? Usually, in addition to that question usually also tied to where do people keep their money, or where do people feel their money is safe. And in many ways, some of them are still talking about the sock drawer or the mattress, right? Because there's an inherent distrust of institutions, banking institutions, financial institutions, things like this. But the reality is you can pay it like bodegas in every corner in urban America. Yes, the availability of credit is there if that's what we're measuring, but the terms of its offer, Keith, that's where, what are you to do? You're right. It's proximate to you. It's on the corner, but am I supposed to go across the town with 2 buses to go to the Citibank that's there? So it's about ease and efficiency, and the current system is not designed for our community in that way.
Right.
So it's like it's almost contributing to the bad decision making they're accusing us of.
Right. Absolutely. And so I don't want to be remiss, and I'll just ask it now since you brought it up. Is that you have a financial therapy program? Why is it structured that way as opposed to just like a financial literacy program? Why do you call it financial therapy?
So that's a great question. So in our kind of program design laboratory, financial education, we've been at this for many decades, and the terminology has changed: financial literacy, financial education, functional knowledge, and economic opportunity as a consumer, sophistication, and your ability to be a consumer on fair terms. And so, excuse me. So what we're talking about is in our community, the ability to apply that knowledge is sometimes limited. And the wrinkle that I wanted to just mention here is that technology is we're a little bit behind and late here. We're moving towards a cashless economy, a cashless society, and yet. And that's where the shackles of credit and credit risk and credit scoring will, can impede our economic development as a community. And so I think there's headwinds there. I could see within our lifetime, cash no longer being the primary method of parts of Africa as well, and South America. So I think we have to understand that we have a lot to catch up to do, and that is learning how to be financial literate within the modern mechanisms of commerce. It's not just compound interest, savings, and credit, and things like that. Is how to compare and contrast products that one bank might be offering against another, different terms, 15 months, 30 months, 8%. I mean, those are math concepts that we sometimes struggle, like, why do I have to learn this? My teenage daughter is now saying, why do I have to learn this now in school? To use it. But that's kind of what we're talking about. Understanding the ability to compare and contrast semi-complex products, but that will be in your deep economic interest if you get it right or wrong. And that's where white America is not burdened by those daily decisions. But we've designed a program where financial literacy, where you talk about budget, savings, credit, all the things that we talk about, the values in it and how to do it, that's, in a way, we talk about as the Christmas tree. That's the chassis. That's the ornaments we put on it are things that we're testing and learning. What about if we add this piece, take this piece away, add this data piece early, and maybe we'll talk about this, that for female-headed households, or for females who are the primary point of contact for the household to society, that we have to prepare them for the different nuances and how they assess risk, how they reach the decision making within a kind of gender specific way. And a lot of it has to do, and I'm not trying to be cute or non-PC, but a lot of it has to do with emotional connections to risk, emotional connections to money, emotional connections to possibly not being in a hierarchical setting the primary decision maker, breadwinner, or aggregator of resources, but having to be in the moment make decisions not just for themselves, but for their children and maybe their mom if in a 2-gen household. So my point is talking about how to eliminate the emotion, understand it's there, but still get to the central decision of which you're responsible. And a lot of that has to do with the qualitative nature as to how we arrive at decisions. A lot we've learned from the weight loss industry as to how you can be triggered to make better decisions. But a lot of that has to do with emotional triggering and sometimes the PTSD that we're carrying around money and insecurities around it.
Oh, really? Fascinating. And well, I mean, and I think just to that, we also get a lot of issues about money from situations that our parents went through.
Oh, yes.
And so when I used to do coaching and relationship coaching, I would, and part of it when one of the challenges that couples would go through would be about finances. So it's like, okay, so some of the questions I would ask, well, how do you feel about money? And how do you feel about, what did you learn about money from your parents?
Yeah.
So I mean, I had a tendency to be more like my mom. And she would tend to hold on to her money and then more than because at the time, that's just the way she was, more for the most part, a stay-at-home.
Yes.
And so when she had money,
there's a lot of
when she had money, it's like she would hold on to it, and so it was a lot different than it is probably now. And so, but you still get that knowledge from somewhere.
Yes, and it's the family,
and then it just carries over.
Yes, and becomes distorted, and you get other kind of externalities that everyone knows someone who did something, and so there's a lot of risk. It's all about risk, right? That risk assessment that we talked about, kind of who you trust. And I also think we are, and I'd love your take on this. We are a very insular community to many positives, but in this conversation, we might be a bit too insular. And sometimes we use social capital theory, Keith, to talk about the kind of ways that the Black community is strong in around personal economic development. And we use social capital to say that we're really good at bonding social capital. We talk to ourselves really well. We have cultural, shared racial fate. We have commonalities, the cultural nuance. You talk about your mom, same as my mom. So I get that. That's bonding. What we're not so good at, what we need to harness for this conversation we're having, is what's called bridging social capital. What can we learn from other networks, and how can we apply it in other communities in ways that bring us into the economic and social mainstream of American society? And we're hesitant to do it because we've been slapped down on the boot end of that for generations. But I think that is the way forward, is to not just hope that we're emerging markets and products are designed for us, but to insist upon it. The way you insist upon it is to know what you don't know. How you know what you don't know is become vulnerable first. How you become vulnerable first is to trust someone to not abuse you. And that's what institutions like mine and yours are about. Right.
Very difficult. And so kind of to shift gears a little bit. So even though in our communities we lag behind, for the most part, our country is an F. It's like, I think 55%. So, and you kind of mentioned some other nations, but what other countries are actually doing finance well? And then what are some of the things that they do which are different?
Yeah,
that we just need to learn as a community, as a country, to kind of get to know better.
Right. That's a good question. So yes, as you mentioned, as a whole population, extrapolating the PFIN study, that America gets an F. But there are other countries, particularly in Europe, particularly in northern Scandinavia, countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, that are known for their high levels of financial literacy. They score around over 70% of their population being what's called financially literate. Okay. And what they do, they embed at a national level. Now, again, these are smaller countries geographically and smaller countries by far by population, but still, they are also connected again by a shared racial Nordic fate. And these things are operationalized as Scandinavia, as a region, not just as individual countries.
Mhm.
So they really looked at 3 or 4 things that are evident across these countries, which is kind of something that we need to do, quite frankly, Keith, which is early financial education in schools as a compulsory part of school curriculum from a young age. And I think in Denmark, financial education is mandatory for students in grades 7 through 9. It's mandatory, the whole country.
Mm-hmm.
They have public awareness campaigns on TV and radio. They have every year, these countries have events that their presidents and their leaders take part in, like Global Money Week, that involves financial professionals being risen to the height of what we in our country would like Hollywood stars and sports athletes. They raise their financial professionals visiting schools and other places, and they become rock stars for a week. So it's putting importance in that, in being like this. They also, and this is something that is in the GFlex study, which is that pension plans and savings plans that are employer provided are more ubiquitous and commonplace than they are in this country. Now, I'm 55, and when I was starting out as a professional, these were more commonly offered. There's been a retrenchment and a scale back of employer offered retirement plans and pension plans and savings.
Oh, wow.
So that's also contributed to it. But employees in those countries I mentioned do receive pension plans that encourage financial planning, long-term savings. And the Danish employees also contribute far more to their own pension plans that of their own income than we do in America. And then the last thing that they do that we just don't do here societally is there's a really strong emphasis on making financial services accessible, as we just talked about, and understandable to everyone, not just the rich or certain parts of Buckhead or Georgetown or Beverly Hills. It's ensuring that people can make informed decisions about their finances because they realize society as a whole benefits when people make better decisions. It affects all of them. So that kind of solidarity and communitarian thinking will be difficult for this country. But I think there are pieces of that we can apply to the Black community. Forget what we're doing nationally. Doesn't have to be a 50-state solution here, but that can be the pockets of maybe I'm making this up, but the top 5 or 7 concentrations of Black population in this country. Maybe we try in those places these core principles and see how we measure that.
Well, we'll see in a few minutes, because I am going to give you your president's hat and see what changes you would make. But one thing I also found interesting, because I had a guy on my podcast about a couple months ago, and he did travel. And one of the things he said was, which is really important note, is that when it comes to traveling, they don't use credit when they travel. They use cash.
Yeah.
And we are a credit society. So, or I guess you want to
think about the insurance, right? When you travel, you can't get travel insurance if you buy stuff by cash. The card itself protects you. The terms and the things like this, those are the details, but you have to know the mechanism by which you're supposed to engage in a modern way. And cash is going the way of the dinosaur.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the question is how quickly should we nudge it that way? I don't think our community is ready for that just yet.
Right. So, about a year ago, you guys had a great panel kind of about this issue, and I just wanted to address some of the things that came up, because I wanted to kind of get your take on it. So kind of it was mentioned, and since we were talking about debt, it was mentioned on the panel that in our community, debt is used for consumption, but it should be used for building wealth, specifically for these 3 areas: buying a home, education, and starting a business. And so do you agree with that statement? How do you feel about that?
I think that's really well said. And I think by and large, that is correct. There might be some combinations of those things. We live in an intersectional world with opportunity, although that's being rolled back by the right and center right. But I think, no, those are the 3 legitimate areas that support and protect intergenerational wealth building. Home ownership. The home ownership gap between Black and white America is what is fueling the racial wealth gap. So we have to address that before we can do that. So home ownership is clear. It's in the data.
And
go ahead.
And so here's something interesting, because I think it was also mentioned, is that, we started to do that right before the subprime messed.
Yes.
We were moving to that end, but then,
Yes.
and it wasn't just our community, but everybody that got a subprime loan got bamboozled. So
yeah.
What do you do in that instance?
Well, I lived through it, and I was at the league. I've been with the league 22 years, so we worked through that. And yes, though that was criminal, quite frankly. Even though, don't get me started, Keith. No one went to jail for that criminality.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, it was products that were offered to Black communities, preying upon again their lack of financial acumen and sophistication and confidence. Subprime products were offered to individuals and households that would have qualified for prime products. That's not only unethical, it's illegal now. It wasn't then.
Right.
But that's what drove everything. That's what contributed to us just reaching a 50% home ownership rate during 2007, 8, and then all of it falling like a house of cards. We have the home ownership rate now of about 42%, which is the same as it was in 1968. So, I mean, that's kind of the 2 steps forward, 3 steps back that you're talking about. But to reaffirm what I was saying about housing, I still think, and it's going to become an issue moving forward, is good debt. Not the kind of exotic, subprime mortgages, because those by and large have been regulated now. And they do make sense for certain people in certain instances.
Right.
But the 30-year fixed mortgage, which is America's gift to the world, that is what Black America needs to be able to embrace more tightly. And that's very important for intergenerational wealth building.
And for the most part, the first-time home buyer loans still exist.
Yes, they do. But I mean, this is real time happening just this week, and in a way to kind of infuse an accelerated way to help Black America catch up. We've been working on what's called special purpose credit products, which allows certain affected classes to be eligible for products: first-time home buyers, Black and brown home buyers, first-generation home buyers, and be eligible for down payment assistance and closing cost assistance. Banks have given in to the Trump administration and shuttered those and dismantled them just at the time when early evidence suggested they were working. So we're in the culture wars, bro, and the tribal wars. So unfortunately, we're going to have to kind of be in a defensive crouch for the next couple of years. But those 3 things are the stool, the legs of the stool that work: home ownership, small business formation, as you mentioned, for folks who are semi-permanently locked out of the mainstream workforce development systems of civil society. Small business and entrepreneurship is the way forward, and you have some experience in that yourself. So that also, the loans and risks that you need to get a business off the ground. The dirty little secret in our community, as you know, though, is that sometimes the entrepreneur, small business operator, is building their business or their credit on the back of their own credit. They don't have a distinguished identity. They are their business, and that can be difficult and fraught at an early stage.
Yeah, definitely.
And then the third area is high. You can never unknow knowledge. You can never not invest in your knowledge, applied knowledge. And I think higher education, going back to school, going to school, getting a vocational degree, getting a higher degree, getting a certificate, getting a credential that's industry recognized, those are also good things to finance. And society recognizes that as a good decision. So those 3 things.
Okay, great. One of the things which I didn't know, or maybe it had something to do with the subprime thing, but they said in the panel, the wealth gap started to catch up a little bit 30 years ago. So was that the subprime issue?
Well, no, so subprime we'd get about 17 years ago, but around 30 years ago, again, some of the things we've been talking about, there was a confluence of just societal and global forces that hit America. And again, you've heard this old anecdote. When America catches the cold, Black America gets the flu. So all these things hit America, and again, we're paying the price for that a little bit in our recent elections with white working class America, who have also suffered under these things, and we have a shared economic fate with them. But again, it was technological advances, right? The rise of technology and the internet in the mid-90s, right? Right? Economic shifts, some communities were prepared.
The year 2000.
Exactly.
Right.
Globalization in the late 90s, NAFTA. Shift higher income individuals and corporations were left lower income workers behind. Tax changes, deregulation, right? You know about this, to favor the wealthy. Capital gains taxes were reduced. Broader international financial sector grew to multinational companies, corporations that were no longer the bank on the corner that knew you and did character lending. And then, wages for middle and lower income workers stagnated while the disparity between the wealthy and the rest really started to jump away at light speeds. So all those things affected the world. It affected this country, but Black America took it on the chin.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for that. So if you were given the task to increase financial education in the Black community, and I know not necessarily just and kind of take yourself out of the National Urban League, but if you were given the opportunity just to let's say head a task force, what are kind of the 5 things you would implement in order to ensure that success?
Great question. Well, first of all, it is doable. The fact that you started the conversation talking about the survey and the index, so it is doable. If you have enough data, the right data, and can disaggregate it and analyze it, you can measure it, which means you can understand its vectors and how to narrow it, and the dials and switches to be able to manipulate it. So closing the financial literacy gap is a significant challenge, a societal level challenge, like a moonshot of an effort. Let's be clear, right? But with a sustained effort, it could be achieved within a decade or two. And I think that's something that President Biden, if he had run a second term, or Vice President Harris had gotten in, she would have embraced these principles. I think that there are at least 3 or 4 that I'll share with you. The first is, as I mentioned and we already talked about, what can we learn? We're so bloody certain of our rightness in this country, but we don't lead in all areas. Quite the opposite. As I mentioned, there are countries in Scandinavia that are leading in this space, countries in Africa, countries in South America. But the first thing we would do is mirror what they've done there, and that's integrate financial education into the school day curriculum. That's the first thing we should do, by mandating financial literacy courses, and also investing in teacher training. So you're cross-training teachers to be able to compensate them. We have to deal with the teachers' unions on that. But I also think it's providing specialized training for teachers so they can be the one trusted voices delivering financial education. The curriculum would have, things like, for middle and high schools, practical skills, budget, savings, investing, and understanding credit. And that will be done in school time. Right now, an organization like mine does those things out of school and after school. And that means not everyone gets it.
Right.
So
right.
The second thing, I think I would just double down on what we know works, and which is why we're funded by not only the federal government, but by our largest banks in this country and philanthropies, which is keep investing in community-based financial literacy programs, workshops, seminars, panels, partnerships with local leaders, collaborating with trusted leaders to promote and facilitate these programs, and using trusted voices like the Urban League and others, and trusted spaces, churches, community centers, right? As places to talk seriously about this important subject. Mm-hmm. Place and space are very important. So we would do those things. The third thing, and again, you prompted me to talk about this earlier, and I quite frankly, as I mentioned, a man of a certain age, I don't fully understand it, but I do know the data suggests that we need to do a better job of leveraging technology and social media.
Right.
Online courses and apps. We just built an online app for the 40,000 Door Dashers who deliver DoorDash, so they can learn on the go.
Oh, wow.
Develop credentials and badges for their knowledge that they can use for discounts and places of sale, and to start their own small business or qualify for loans with banks. So you got to meet people where they are.
Oh,
so
nice.
We built an app, and I think that needs to be expanded into communities of color. Full stop. So that's.
Do you guys have a TikTok page?
We do.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
We do. And so I've been social media campaigns, Instagram, TikTok, X. I think we have to just go where the conversation, where we can influence it, and financial tips, stories, and educational content to reach a broader audiences there. And then the last thing I'd say is, and something that we've really invested in is, again, I talked to you about that Christmas tree that we built, or that chassis. So again, in addition to the financial therapy, we've also added kind of mentorship programs. How can you have, as I mentioned that they do in Scandinavia, people who are bankers of color, people who are different in industries, in the appraisal industry, in the insurance company, in the certified financial place industry, getting those people exposed, young people exposed to them, their career pathways, getting mentorship programs up and running, and establishing mentorship programs where financially literate individuals mentor others in the community. That is very important. And also, we've also developed one-on-one financial coaching that goes alongside group education. Group education is done classroom style or in a large kind of Zoom audience room. Since COVID, we've had to do that. But a one-on-one coaching, this is one-on-one customized, personalized advice and support, what the affluent have and call certified financial planners. Poor people need that and can do with that as well. We call it financial coaching, and it's free of charge. So we designed that program. And then again, doing things like this, talking to you in all mediums to elevate the urgency and the efforts that we're trying to launch.
Oh, wow. Okay. Fascinating. Yeah. And it's interesting when you say planner. I wonder if the name was changed, would it change the narrative?
It's a great word. You're really smart. We've talked about that, is in what you call it. Does it advance or inhibit the value that people perceive in it? And we do think aligning it to planning, financial planning, is important here. Coaching suggests that, in a sports way, like you're not fully developed, right? You need some hand holding or guardrails. You're not ready, possibly, or can't do it on your own. Planning is a little different. You're given the knowledge and then you have to execute it. So you're right. It's a good point.
Well, and also just by, because you get inundated with, especially like now, people are watching sports, it's just fascinating. A lot of, and I haven't done a study on that. I'm just thinking right now, just like you'll see the financial planning during March Madness, of course.
The commercials. I'm on that national board. That's high placement. Yeah. There.
But I don't know. But is it only shown for March Madness, or is it shown for both tournaments?
No, it's a great. Wow, that's a really great point.
So you talk about where women, there's a disparity between men and women,
right?
But is it only shown on the men's tournament? You might want to ask that since you're on the is it shown on the women's tournament as well?
I need to look at the marketing and comm strategy, because that's a really great subtle thing people may not have picked up.
Yeah, it won't pick up on. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that is great. That is great stuff. Here's one that may not be, because I know we talk about our country, but we have a lot of, we're not really unified as a country. We really haven't been. Just because we are just the way our country is set up. So do you think we'd ever really unify around the whole finance piece?
I mean, bro, look, my glass is usually half full, and I've enjoyed speaking with you. And we'll continue to enjoy interacting with you. But I've got to say that no on this in the short term, and I'll explain why. I think the form of perverted and accelerated capitalism that we're in now, which necessarily creates a whole cast of winners for society financially and in terms of prestige. In America modernly, it necessarily is offset by the equal number of losers, or even more, multiplied by a factor of 5 or 10. So I think the system is structured. No, I think winning and losing in this context, as artfully as I'm using it, has to do with knowledge. Knowledge is what those with it prefer that those without it do not have, because the difference between those who have it and those don't can be articulated in interest rate, can be articulated in the more you'll pay for credit, the more you'll pay for cash. If everyone had the same credit, no one would make money. So the system is predicated upon some folks having to pay more for more for credit.
Yeah, you have to lose.
They've demonstrated their ability not to use it well in the past. So that it's built into the system.
Yeah, because
it always will be.
And I haven't been a big study of countries, so I would think the Scandinavian countries are more socialist in nature.
Yes.
And so they care about, and which you can go back to history, is like, yeah, well,
Yes.
they're all the same for the most part. And so therefore, that it lends itself to be more that
Yes.
way, as
That's the
opposed
better
to,
way to say that. I
yeah.
think the cultural shared fate, as I talked about, allows that. And in fact, we're seeing a little bit in the Latinx community, because again, we've not talked about our Latin brothers and sisters over here.
Right.
They actually exceed the Black metrics considerably, and the Asian community as well, because they have a shared language, a pan-Latino identity possibility. Same thing in the Asian community. And again, that needs to be disaggregated, that data. I'm not broad brushing it, but
Right.
still, a shared language and a shared cultural understanding across continents in a transnational way allows them to sidestep some of this. Although they do have the immigration issue, they do have the ability to transact issue, which is being cracked down on, unfortunately. But they have other social things working in their favor that we don't.
Right. Well, yeah, share they have to share to survive. They have to work. They work together,
and the comfort in
and
that.
they lift up. Especially if one moves up economically, they still try to lift up their
familial obligation.
all of that.
So it's not a multi-two-gen households, which we have as well.
It lends to
that. There's a deeper tradition of that.
Yeah. Great stuff. So this Sai, thank you for coming on today. This has really been great. Just one last thing. I have two more things.
Yeah.
If you had for those who wanted to do more reading, where maybe reading is helpful, is there a book that you would recommend that someone that could pick up and they would learn more about financial literacy or financial planning?
Well, that's a great question. I'm gonna answer it this way. There are dime a dozen, just a Google search, because every bank, every corporation, they get, again, in this full circle of cynicism, Keith, they all get tax breaks and credits for developing curriculum that they put on the web for free. And they're dime a dozen. They all talk about it the same way. And I would answer you in a different way. I would like folks, if they're interested, to pick up a book which steps back and gives real life stories to the effect of not investing in your own knowledge and advocating for yourself economically, and what can happen to individuals if you get it wrong, and what are the pathways to get it right. And there's a very important book, a New York Times bestseller, that I have read and I give out to folks in this topic. It's a book called Poverty by America. Poverty, by America.
Okay. I've never heard of that.
It's by a professor. His name is Matthew Desmond. And that's what I would recommend. It's topical. Everyone's talking about it. And it is a great treatment on the devastating and, cascading effect that requires financial literacy, among other things. I think people will understand the seriousness of what we just discussed once they've read that book.
Interesting. Is it easy to read?
Yes.
Is it easy to read? Okay.
It's an easy read. And for our younger listeners, it's something that would impress their high school teacher and prepare them for the kind of analysis that today's college world requires.
Oh, okay. Yeah, chat. If you guys want to read that, maybe we'll do a book club. We'll do a book club around that. I think that would be fascinating. And so my last question, I always like to save for the end, and it's always a surprise because we as just African American, we're always trying to we're always doing a lot in our communities, uplifting our families and the people around us. We may not necessarily think about ourselves or our standing in the world. So my question is always, right now, how are you feeling as a Black man?
Oh, wow. What a question. That's a simple one without being simplistic. And I get the implications in it.
And take your time.
I'm not feeling particularly hopeful, but I'm feeling buoyed by at least knowing I'm alive, because at least I'm in the fight. Working for the National Urban League, I would rather not be on the sideline. I'd rather be in the fight. And so I, as much as I feel as if our backs collectively are against the wall again, or a knee on our neck again economically, I would much rather be in it than reading about it. I would much rather be living in this history than asking someone why did they do something about it. So, which is why I'm joining this conversation with you. The more we get together, the more we talk, the more people will learn and improve upon it. So I'm not feeling particularly hopeful because I think there are people in charge in this country who don't think much of us. And that's okay. And that's temporary by those people. But I do think our permanent interests never wane. And again, I'm glad we're in the fight to try to advance them even a little bit. Even today, what we've talked about might help one person.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And I wanted to kind of touch upon this before we end, is that, yeah, I think we haven't had this kind of turmoil in our country in a long time. So I think that's, I mean, pockets may have had turmoil, but from a country standpoint, we haven't had this kind of turmoil. So I think that's one of the things whereby our parents and forefathers, we had those those challenges with wars and things of that nature. We haven't had this in a while. So I think it's a little bit disconcerting to have to figure out what's going to happen. So
yes,
hopefully it will kind of shift the way we view our neighbors and things of that nature. So it'll be fascinating to see. Hopefully that will come about.
Can I ask you, how do you feel as a Black man? I'm sure you ask that in your daily life of other people, but how are you doing?
Yeah, most people don't ask me when I ask, but I'm feeling hopeful. When I work with my chat, which mostly are younger, they give me hope because they have a pulse on how things can change. Some are finding different ways for community. I mean, to make money, and that's out of necessity. So they've had to go to TikTok. They've had to rely on social media for income because they didn't find just regular jobs open to them.
Right.
And because we as older people, and it's a trickle down effect, we're holding on to those jobs.
Right.
I mean, jobs at like fast food are adults, not college students or high school students. These are adults.
Good point.
In these jobs. So it's like, okay, if I can't work at Jersey Mike's or McDonald's, where am I going to work? And so their path to, since we're talking about financial literacy, our path to them even finding work is challenging.
Yeah.
And then because that just helps lend to maturity. So if they can manage money, then they can buy things that where they have to be responsible for, and that's being delayed. And I think that's we've done a disservice around that, but they keep me youthful, and and I've got kids, and they're all growing and thriving, so that keeps me going. And I just try to do the best I can each day. It can be struggle just because of the things that get hit from our end, but I just try to keep doing it as best as I can.
Well, you're clearly a leader in our community. And again, I came in here and I said I was not hopeful. My glass was half empty. But look, you just in these last 2 minutes, you've maybe changed around. I'm walking around here with a little bit of a skip in my step because we're a resilient people.
Right.
To your point, we've seen it in different forms before. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
And I think also, kind of from a youth, knowing kind of the youth, I think if the Urban League, especially around this piece, can find innovative ways to talk about it, then what we usually have done in the past, we'll do workshops and just all the stuff that we do, expecting our folks to come, and then they'll come.
Right.
So if you can find innovative ways, asynchronous learning, TikTok, I think that needle will be moved much further.
Yeah. Great point.
Yeah.
Great point. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So Sai, thank you for being on today. This has been fascinating. Just hold on a second as I close out. So thank you for being on today. Fascinating work. We got to do work in our communities a lot more. And for anyone that just doesn't understand their own financial literacy and what it means, talk about it. Seek somebody out. Go to your bank if you have a bank account. Mr. Richardson said that banks have their curriculum. Ask for it. And so we can start to move the needle and to be more comfortable. So 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we will be more financially literate than we were in the past. So this is Keith Dent from the Black Men Speak podcast. Peace.